They say revenge is sweet, but what they don't tell you is that sometimes it begins with humiliation, with your own sister trying to have you thrown out of a luxury party like you're trash. So how did a poor gardener like me end up standing in a ballroom full of millionaires, only for one powerful man's words to freeze everyone in place 2 minutes later? Let me tell you how. My name is Sheila. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a landscaper. And this is the story of how I lost 10 years of my life before finally getting it back. The crystal chandeliers above me glowed like artificial stars, throwing golden light across polished marble floors and designer gowns. Every surface sparkled. Every laugh sounded expensive. The air itself smelled like champagne and perfume. Meanwhile, I stood there in muddy work boots, faded protective gear, and sleeves that still carried the faint scent of soil and freshly cut grass. I didn't belong. I could feel it in the way people stared, in the way conversations softened when I walked past, in the way eyes swept over my red clay-stained shoes, and then quickly looked away, as if poverty were contagious. I tried to shrink myself. I kept my hands close to my sides, aware of how rough and cracked they were from years of manual labor. My shoulders tensed, my heartbeat echoed in my ears, and then I heard her voice. Sheila? My sister Paula emerged from the crowd like a storm wrapped in silk. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, diamonds catching the light with every step. She looked like she belonged on magazine covers, not related to someone like me. Her smile vanished the moment she saw what I was wearing. Without saying a word, she grabbed my wrist and dragged me behind a massive marble pillar, away from her wealthy friends. Her grip was tight, her manicured nails dug into my skin. "What do you think you're doing here?" she hissed through clenched teeth. "Did you come to apply for the janitor position?" I tried to pull away. She tightened her hold. "Look at yourself," she continued, eyes filled with disgust. "You're embarrassing me." Behind her, her friends had already gathered, covering their mouths as they giggled. One of them whispered something about my clothes smelling like grass. Another wrinkled her nose dramatically. They looked at me like I was a bug that had crawled onto their pristine floor. My throat burned. I bit my lip to keep from crying. Paula lifted her hand toward the security guard near the entrance. Just one small gesture, and I knew exactly what would happen next. I would be escorted out, publicly, like I didn't exist. But before she could speak, the room changed. The heavy wooden doors opened. A man walked in. He didn't rush. He didn't smile. His presence alone seemed to silence the entire ballroom. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the jazz music faltered, as if unsure whether it was still welcome. His sharp eyes swept across the crowd. Then they landed on me. Paula's fingers loosened instantly. Her face went pale. And in that moment, something deep inside me stirred a strange sense that this night was about to become something much bigger than humiliation. Because this wasn't just a party anymore. It was the beginning of the end. 10 years earlier, my life had looked very different. It was raining hard at Bonaventure Cemetery the day we buried our parents. Thick drops soaked through our black coats as we stood beneath umbrellas, watching two caskets disappear into wet earth. The priest finished his prayers. The crowd slowly dispersed. I couldn't breathe. Just as I turned away, my brother-in-law Derek approached, holding a leather briefcase. His expression was solemn, professional, the face of a man delivering bad news. He opened the folder and showed me documents filled with aggressive red numbers. "Our parents," he said, "had left behind a massive business debt. Creditors were already circling. If we didn't start paying immediately, everything would be seized, including the family home." The ground felt like it shifted beneath my feet. I had always believed my parents were financially responsible, stable, safe. Paula collapsed to her knees in the mud, clutching wet grass with trembling hands. Mascara streamed down her cheeks as she looked up at me. "I'll destroy my credit to save our family name," she cried. "But I can't do this alone." She grabbed my hands. "Please, Sheila, help me." That same morning, I had received my acceptance letter to Savannah College of Art and Design. I wanted to become a landscape architect. I had dreams, plans, a future that finally felt within reach. I reached into my coat pocket and touched the crisp paper one last time. Then I tore it into pieces and let the rain turn it into pulp. I promised Paula I would do whatever it took. And that promise cost me everything. The following week, I started working at an industrial laundry facility. 16-hour shifts. Toxic chemical fumes. Machines so loud they drowned out thought. My lungs burned. My back ached. My eyes stung constantly from bleach in the air. In summer, the heat was unbearable. But I never missed a shift. I couldn't afford to. On weekends, I mowed lawns in wealthy neighborhoods. I lifted heavy bags of dirty linens until my arms shook. My hands transformed from soft and hopeful into cracked and scarred. Most nights, I collapsed onto my mattress without even showering. At the beginning of every month, I sent 80% of my paycheck to Paula. Without complaint. Without question. I trusted her. She told me she was fighting creditors, negotiating settlements, carrying the burden for both of us. When I visited, she lived in a beautiful apartment downtown. She said it was a corporate benefit. Derek always had expensive takeout, which he claimed was paid for by his law firm. They drank wine. I skipped lunch to save $5. I never asked for bank statements. I never demanded proof. I told myself that at least one of us was living decently, while we paid for our parents' mistakes. I told myself that one day, the debt would be gone. I told myself my life would finally begin. I didn't realize I was funding their luxury with my suffering, and I didn't know yet that everything I believed was a lie. For 10 years, I never questioned the debt, not because I was naive by nature, but because I chose to believe in my sister. When you lose your parents at 22, you cling to the only family you have left. You don't investigate them. You don't audit them. You trust them. That trust became the foundation of my suffering. 3 months before the party at the Ritz-Carlton, on a quiet Sunday morning, I was sitting on the edge of my narrow bed, stretching my aching back before another double shift at the laundry facility. The room I rented was barely large enough for a twin mattress and a folding table. The wallpaper peeled near the ceiling. The air always smelled faintly of detergent and old pipes. That was when I heard the screech of tires outside. Through the cracked window, I saw Paula's bright red sports car pull up in front of the boarding house like it had taken a wrong turn into the wrong life. The paint gleamed even under the cloudy sky. It didn't belong on my street. She didn't step out. She lowered her window just enough to slide her sunglasses down and examine the porch with visible disgust. "Get in," she said. No greeting, no smile. I hesitated for a second. My back was throbbing from the previous night's shift. My hands were still raw from lifting heavy bags of wet linens. But she had that tone, the one that meant refusal wasn't an option. Inside the car, everything smelled like expensive leather and perfume. I sat carefully, afraid the dust on my work clothes might stain something. Paula kept her eyes on the road. "I acquired a distressed property in the historic district," she said casually. "It needs landscaping before resale. We can't afford a professional crew right now. Every dollar saved goes toward the debt." The debt. That word had ruled my life for a decade. I nodded without argument. We drove past manicured streets, lined with oak trees draped in Spanish moss. The houses grew larger, whiter, more elegant. Finally, we stopped in front of a colonial estate, surrounded by iron gates and ancient trees. This was not distressed. It was magnificent. The kind of place tourists photograph. Paula pressed a button on her keychain, and the gates swung open smoothly. "Maintenance is a nightmare," she sighed dramatically. "The creditors are relentless." I swallowed my questions. I always swallowed my questions. She disappeared inside the house while I went straight to the garden. The rose bushes had grown wild, but the soil was rich and forgiving. I worked in silence, trimming, pulling weeds, shaping hedges under the heavy midday sun. Sweat rolled down my spine. My shirt clung to my back. My stomach growled because I'd skipped breakfast again. After 2 hours, my throat felt like sandpaper. I noticed the French windows of the living room were open, sheer curtains fluttering slightly in the breeze. I walked toward them quietly, intending to ask Paula for a glass of water. That's when I heard her laugh. It was light, carefree, a sound I hadn't heard from her in years. I froze beside a large camellia bush. She was on the phone. No, don't worry, she was saying between bursts of laughter. We'll fly business class this time. I deserve it. There was a pause. Then she said something that made my heart stop. That stupid girl still thinks she's paying off mom and dad's debt. Honestly, her transfers are enough to fund my Paris shopping for months. My hands went numb. The pruning shears slipped from my grip and clattered onto the brick pathway. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it. My mind scrambled for alternative explanations. Maybe she was joking. Maybe she was exaggerating. But then she mentioned Chanel, Dior, hotel reservations, a private driver. There was no stress in her voice. No burden, no debt. Only luxury. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to grip the edge of the window frame to steady myself. 10 years. 16-hour shifts. Chemical burns. Missed meals. Torn dreams. All of it. Funding her lifestyle? I didn't think. I moved. I marched around to the back door and pushed it open without knocking. The kitchen was enormous marble countertops, stainless steel appliances, a wine fridge humming softly in the corner. Derek stood at the island, swirling red wine in a crystal glass. He looked mildly annoyed to see me. My eyes locked onto the heavy gold watch gleaming on his wrist. It was the kind of watch I'd seen advertised in magazines worth more than I made in 2 years. He noticed my stare and subtly pulled his cuff down. "It's fake," he said too quickly. "For client appearances." I didn't respond. "Where is Paula?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my effort to steady it. "In the living room," he said, stepping slightly to block my path. "What's wrong?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see the responsible lawyer helping us survive a financial catastrophe. I saw a gatekeeper, a man who controlled information, a man who had never once shown me official bank statements. "Show me the monthly reports," I said. "Show me how much the principal has decreased." His expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Paula entered the kitchen, phone still in hand. "What's going on?" she demanded. "I want to see proof," I said. "The debt, the payments, all of it." Her face changed instantly. She grabbed a linen cloth from the counter and threw it at me. It hit my cheek sharply. "How dare you question me?" she shouted. "I sacrificed my youth carrying this debt for you." For me? The irony was almost suffocating. Derek stepped closer, his voice cold and controlled. "Financial matters are complex, Sheila. You wouldn't understand." That sentence, those 4 words, they reduced me to nothing. I stood there, breathing heavily, realizing something terrifying. I had no proof that the debt even existed, only their words, only my blind loyalty. Paula pointed toward the back door. "If you're going to accuse us after everything we've done for you, then leave." I could have screamed. I could have accused her of what I overheard, but instinct told me something different. If I confronted her now, she would deny it. They would close ranks, and I would still have no evidence. So I did the only thing I could. I lowered my eyes. I turned around, and I walked back into the garden. Not because I believed her anymore, but because I needed time to think. As I resumed trimming the hedges, my hands moved automatically, but my mind was racing. Every memory replayed itself differently now: the luxury apartment, the expensive takeout, the designer shoes she claimed were discounted. The pieces were shifting. The trust I'd built my life on was cracking. And for the first time in 10 years, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that the debt had never been real at all. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I finished the landscaping in silence, because something inside me had changed. I wasn't the obedient sister anymore. I was a woman who had just heard the truth, and once you hear something like that, you can't unhear it. I didn't know yet how deep the betrayal went. I didn't know about the envelope in the recycling bin. I didn't know about the trust fund. But that afternoon, under the brutal Georgia sun, a seed was planted. And it wasn't doubt. It was awakening. I tried to pretend everything was normal after that day in Paula's garden. I went back to the laundry facility. I lifted the same heavy bags. I breathed in the same chemical air. I transferred the same money at the beginning of the month. But something inside me had shifted. Once a doubt enters your heart, it doesn't stay quiet. It grows. I started replaying conversations in my mind while the washing machines thundered beside me. Every time Paula talked about negotiating with creditors, every time Derek dismissed my questions with professional jargon, every time they lived comfortably while I counted coins for groceries, the puzzle pieces were rearranging themselves. 2 weeks later, on a gloomy Saturday afternoon, I was walking past Paula's mansion with a small basket of organic vegetables I had grown behind my boarding house. The sky was bruised purple, heavy with rain. Wind tore through the Spanish moss hanging from the oak trees, like the city itself was uneasy. I hadn't planned to stop, but her large blue recycling bin had been knocked over by the wind, spilling bottles, magazines, and loose paper across the wet driveway. Old habits die hard. Even after everything, I still didn't want Paula to come home and scream at me for leaving a mess. So I crouched down to clean it up. That's when I saw it. A thick envelope made of textured blue paper, ripped violently in half, and tossed among wine bottles and soggy leaves. The corner was stamped with a gold banking logo. My pulse spiked. I picked it up slowly. The paper felt expensive even through the rain. Then I saw the name printed on the front. Beneficiary, Sheila. My own name. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Not Paula. Not Derek. Me. My hands began to shake so badly I had to press the envelope against my chest to steady myself. I looked around the quiet street, suddenly paranoid that someone was watching, that Derek might appear from nowhere, with that polite smile that never reached his eyes. I shoved the torn pieces deep into my jacket pocket and walked away as fast as my trembling legs would carry me. I didn't go home. Home didn't feel safe anymore. Instead, I boarded a crosstown bus and sat in the back row, gripping my pocket like it contained my heart. Every passing stop felt unreal. Every stranger looked suspicious. I got off near the Savannah Public Library. The building was massive and cool inside, its stone walls absorbing sound. I headed straight to the basement archives where the public computers were rarely used. I chose a terminal tucked into the far corner, away from curious eyes. My fingers shook as I typed my father's name into the probate records database. I misspelled it twice. When the search finally processed, a spinning digital hourglass filled the screen. I held my breath, then the document opened. I expected to see foreclosure notices, bankruptcy filings, liens. Instead, I was staring at an annual statement for a family trust fund. Principal balance, over $2 million. I blinked, then I leaned closer. I scrolled. There was no debt. No outstanding loans. No creditors listed. Only one category stood out: management fees. My eyes burned as I traced the transaction history. Monthly withdrawals, transfers to luxury travel agencies, payments to high-end car dealerships, jewelry boutiques, all funded directly from the trust. My trust. I covered my mouth to keep from screaming. The poverty I had lived in for 10 years wasn't an accident. It was manufactured. Every paycheck I sent, Paula had gone straight into her lifestyle. Every sleepless night, every chemical burn, every missed meal. They hadn't been saving our family. They had been stealing my life. I staggered out of the library into pouring rain, my vision blurred with tears. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. I couldn't breathe properly. My legs carried me without direction until I found myself on the doorstep of my best friend Lisa's apartment. She opened the door and pulled me inside before I could collapse. I didn't have words. I just shoved the damp envelope pieces and screenshots from my phone into her hands. She read in silence. Her face changed slowly, from confusion to disbelief to fury. I slid down onto her couch, shaking uncontrollably as a panic attack ripped through me. My chest tightened. Air refused to come. Lisa knelt in front of me and grabbed my shoulders. "Look at me," she said firmly. She slapped my cheek lightly, not to hurt me, but to anchor me. It worked. Fresh tears spilled down my face. "They stole 10 years of my life," I whispered. "I was eating expired bread while they were drinking vintage wine." Lisa wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and paced the room like a caged tiger. Then she stopped in front of me and took my cold hands in hers. "Crying won't fix this," she said. "You need proof, you need timing, and you need them to make one more mistake." I stared at her, hollow. What do I do? She leaned closer. You go back to being the obedient sister. Just for a little while. The idea made my stomach turn. Pretend you know nothing, she continued. Let them feel safe. People get careless when they think they've won. I nodded slowly. It felt like swallowing glass. 5 days later, Paula and Derek appeared at my apartment with smiles so sweet they made my skin crawl. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across my tiny living room when I opened the door. Paula held a bottle of sparkling cider. Derek clutched his leather portfolio against his chest. They walked in without waiting to be invited. Paula looked around my cramped space with thinly disguised disdain before softening her expression into something that resembled concern. She guided me to the small wobbling table and placed a thick blue-bound document in front of me. We've been working very hard for you, she said. This is a lifetime medical insurance policy. We paid for everything up front. You'll never have to worry about hospital bills again. Her eyes shimmered with fake emotion. Derek placed a heavy fountain pen beside the papers. I flipped through casually, pretending to admire the formatting. Then I found it. Buried deep in the legal language. Irrevocable waiver of asset claims. By signing, I would give up all rights to the trust fund. They were trying to erase me. I felt a cold rage spread through my veins. But I kept my face soft. I picked up the pen, then accidentally knocked over my coffee. Dark liquid flooded the pages. Derek exploded. Paula tried to calm him. I apologized profusely, playing the clumsy, grateful sister. Then I made my suggestion. Why don't I come to your company party on Friday to sign it? I'll bring my glasses. They hesitated, then agreed, because they needed my signature. And they thought they still owned me. They had no idea I had already taken back my power. And they definitely didn't know that I was about to walk into a bank that morning with evidence that would end their entire world. I didn't sleep the night after Paula and Derek left my apartment. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that clause in the document irrevocable waiver of asset claims burned into the back of my mind like a warning label. They weren't just stealing from me anymore. They were trying to erase me legally, quietly, permanently. I lay on my narrow bed, listening to the pipes rattle in the walls and the distant sound of traffic outside, replaying every conversation from the past 10 years. Every moment I'd ignored my instincts. Every time Derek had brushed off my questions with professional confidence. Every time Paula had framed her cruelty as sacrifice. By dawn, I knew something with absolute clarity. If I hesitated now, I would lose everything. So, instead of putting on my gardening gloves that morning, I took the city bus downtown. I still wore my cleanest pair of overalls, faded denim, frayed cuffs, mud stains that no amount of scrubbing ever fully removed. I felt painfully out of place as I stepped into the glass and steel fortress of Sterling Bank headquarters. Executives in tailored suits flowed past me like I was invisible. The receptionist barely glanced up before saying, "Deliveries go to the loading dock." I placed both hands on the counter. "I'm not a delivery," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. I pulled the yellowed business card from my pocket, the one I'd found tucked inside my parents' old file folder at the library. A private extension was written on the back in fading ink. Her eyebrows lifted slightly as she typed the number into her phone. Then her expression changed. She straightened in her chair. "Yes, sir," she stammered. "She's here now." She hung up and pointed silently toward a private elevator. My legs felt weak as I stepped inside. 40 floors passed in quiet seconds while my heart pounded loud enough to feel in my throat. I had one chance to say everything right. The doors opened into a spacious office that smelled faintly of mahogany and old paper. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Savannah's skyline. A man stood by the glass, hands clasped behind his back. "Mr. Sterling." He turned when he heard me enter. His polite smile faltered slightly when his eyes traveled from my work clothes to my cracked hands. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. I walked straight to his desk and laid out everything: the taped envelope pieces, the trust statement printouts, the forged waiver Paula wanted me to sign. My voice shook at first, but I forced myself to continue. I told him about the funeral, the fake debt, the laundry factory, the years of exhaustion, the money transfers, the luxury items I'd seen with my own eyes. I showed him screenshots of the transactions. He picked up the papers slowly. His face darkened with every page. By the time he reached the forged signatures, his jaw was clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. "They told me you were living comfortably off the interest," he said quietly. "Derek's reports indicated you were content." I held up my hands. These are the hands of someone who scrubs industrial floors and lifts wet linens 16 hours a day. His composure finally broke. He slammed his fist onto the desk, rattling the crystal decanters on the sideboard. "This is theft, fraud, abuse of fiduciary duty." He pressed a button on his intercom and summoned his compliance director. Within minutes, archival signature cards were pulled up on the wall-mounted monitor. Withdrawal slips appeared on the screen, each one bearing a clumsy imitation of my name. I pointed out dates when I had been working double shifts. Transfers to luxury travel agencies, payments to car dealerships, receipts from jewelry boutiques, all traced directly to my trust fund. Mr. Sterling closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, they were wet. "I failed you," he said. "And for that, I'm sorry." Then he straightened. "Arresting them quietly won't be enough." I looked at him. "They humiliated you for 10 years, he continued. "They deserve to be exposed." He checked his calendar. "They're hosting a corporate gala tonight. I'm the guest of honor." A cold realization settled over me. He stood and walked toward me, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. "You will go to that party exactly as you are. Do not change your clothes. Do not hide your scars." Panic surged in my chest. "They won't even let me inside," I said. "Paula will have security remove me before I can speak." He handed me a freshly stamped certified copy of the trust statement. "I'll be right behind you," he said. "No one will touch you." He met my eyes. "Your appearance is the strongest evidence of their cruelty." I left the bank feeling like I was walking through water. Every step toward the bus stop felt unreal. My reflection in storefront windows looked small and tired. But for the first time, I wasn't powerless. That evening, I returned to the Ritz-Carlton. The ballroom shimmered with wealth and false smiles. Jazz music drifted through the air. Servers glided between guests, holding trays of champagne. Paula spotted me immediately. Her face twisted with fury. She stormed across the room, seized my wrist, and dragged me behind a marble pillar. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. "You're humiliating me." Her friends gathered nearby, whispering cruel comments about my clothes and the faint smell of soil. She raised her hand toward security. And then, the doors opened. Mr. Sterling entered. The room fell silent. Paula released me instantly and smoothed her designer gown, pasting on a dazzling smile. She rushed forward, extending her manicured hand. He walked past her without even acknowledging it. He stopped in front of me and bowed. I felt my knees weaken. Every guest watched in stunned silence. "Good evening, Miss Sheila," he said clearly. "The audit of your trust fund is complete." Paula froze. Derek's champagne glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the marble floor. "You are the sole heir to $2 million. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. Paula tried to laugh, grabbing Mr. Sterling's arm. "She's just a gardener," she shrieked. "She's unstable." He shook her off. With a nod to his assistant, the projection screen lit up behind us. Bank records, forged signatures, luxury purchases. Every lie displayed in merciless detail. Guests backed away from Paula and Derek like they were radioactive. The doors burst open again. Police officers entered. Paula tried to flee. Her former friends stepped aside. Mr. Sterling pointed. "Arrest them." And in the same room where she called me disgrace, my sister learned what disgrace truly meant. The ballroom emptied faster than I expected. One moment, it had been full of laughter and glittering glasses. The next, it was hollow and echoing, like a theater after the final act. Police officers led Paula and Derek away, while guests avoided my eyes, suddenly unsure whether to feel embarrassed or relieved that the spotlight had moved on. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I stood there quietly, gripping the certified trust statement, Mr. Sterling had placed in my hand, my knees still weak from everything that had just happened. 10 years of lies had collapsed in less than 10 minutes. Outside, Savannah's night air felt cooler than usual. The city lights blurred as I stepped onto the sidewalk. Mr. Sterling walked beside me in silence until we reached the curb. "It will move quickly from here," he said. "The evidence is overwhelming." I nodded, too emotionally exhausted to form proper words. He hesitated before adding, "You were very brave tonight." I didn't feel brave. I felt hollow. In the days that followed, everything moved at a speed that made my head spin. The trust account was immediately frozen. Paula's mansion and red sports car were seized within 72 hours. Derek's law firm released a statement distancing themselves from him before his name even hit the news cycle. He accepted an emergency plea deal to avoid a public trial that would have destroyed what little reputation he had left. The state bar disbarred him almost immediately. He was transferred to a federal holding facility while awaiting sentencing for fraud and asset theft. The judge later called him a predator who used legal knowledge to exploit the vulnerable. Paula didn't get a plea deal. Her downfall was faster and uglier. Sheriff deputies arrived at her mansion while she was still in shock from the arrest. The locks were changed. Her credit cards were canceled. Her designer wardrobe was sold at consignment for a fraction of its value. The same high society friends who once toasted with her blocked her number overnight. Within a week, she was living in a crumbling studio apartment on the edge of town, commuting by bus to a minimum wage job she despised. I learned all of this from Lisa. I didn't go looking for updates. I was too busy trying to figure out how to exist in a world where survival was no longer my full-time job. The trust funds were restored quickly, thanks to Mr. Sterling's intervention. Within a month, I bought back my parents' old property and began the process of opening my own landscaping studio. Standing beneath the new brass sign that read Sheila Landscape Design, I inhaled the scent of jasmine and fresh mulch and felt something I hadn't experienced in a decade: peace. My office walls were painted a soft sage green. Blueprints for city parks and residential gardens covered the drafting table. For the first time since I was 22, I was designing a future instead of enduring a present. But healing isn't linear. Some nights I still woke up expecting an alarm clock for the laundry shift. Some mornings I instinctively calculated how much of my paycheck I needed to send away before remembering I didn't have to anymore. Trauma doesn't disappear just because justice arrives. Then, one quiet Tuesday afternoon, while I was reviewing irrigation plans for a botanical garden, the bell above my office door chimed softly. I looked up, expecting a client. Instead, I saw Paula. She stood in the doorway like a ghost of the woman she used to be. Her coat was faded. Dark circles framed her eyes. Gray roots showed through unkempt hair. Her shoulders were hunched, as if the world had finally taught her what gravity feels like. She stepped forward hesitantly. Her hands trembled as she placed them on my desk, leaving greasy fingerprints on polished wood. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She cried. Soft, broken sobs. "I just need a little help," she whispered. "The apartment has roaches. The heater barely works. I have to take 2 buses to work every day." She told me she needed money for a deposit on a better place. She told me she was suffering. She told me she was family. I listened quietly. I felt no anger, no triumph, just a strange, distant calm. The woman who once controlled my entire life now stood before me asking for mercy. I slowly stood up and walked around the desk. Paula reached for my sleeve. "Please," she said. "I'll do anything. Mom and Dad wouldn't want this." I pulled my arm away. My voice was steady when I spoke. "My money is for building a future," I said, "not rescuing people who tried to erase my past." She stared at me like she didn't recognize the person I had become. I opened the heavy oak door and gestured toward the porch. She hesitated. Then I remembered her words from the party, the way she had sneered at my clothes, my job, my existence. I met her eyes. "If you need money so badly," I said quietly, "why don't you apply for a janitor position? I heard they're hiring." Her breath caught. She stepped backward. I closed the door. The lock clicked, and that sound felt final. I returned to my drafting table, picked up my pencil, and continued designing a garden that would bloom in spring. Because revenge didn't look like screaming. It didn't look like cruelty. It looked like choosing myself. I learned that greed is a blade that always cuts back. Paula and Derek traded integrity for luxury, and in the end, they lost everything that actually mattered. I also learned something else. Never matter how deep the lie, truth eventually rises. And no matter how small you feel, your worth is never determined by the clothes on your back. That afternoon, sunlight streamed through my office window, warming the paper beneath my hands. For the first time in 10 years, my life finally belonged to me. People often ask me what revenge feels like. They imagine something loud, something explosive. They picture screaming matches, slammed doors, maybe even champagne poured in celebration. But that isn't how it happened for me. Revenge arrived quietly. It came in the form of early morning sunlight, warming my drafting table. It came in the smell of fresh soil instead of industrial bleach. It came in the sound of pencils scratching across blueprints instead of washing machines roaring in my ears. It came when I finally stopped surviving and started living. In the weeks after Paula and Derek were arrested, Savannah slowly returned to its gentle rhythm. Tourists filled the historic streets again. Cafes reopened their patios. Spanish moss swayed lazily in the breeze, indifferent to human drama. But my world had been permanently altered. The justice system moved with shocking speed once the financial evidence was made public. Derek was formally disbarred by the State Ethics Committee. His plea deal spared him a long public trial, but it couldn't spare him from prison. He now spends his days behind concrete walls, stripped of the title he once used to intimidate me. The judge called him a predator, who weaponized knowledge against someone who trusted him. Paula's collapse was quieter but just as complete. Her mansion was seized, her accounts frozen, her luxury life evaporated overnight. The friends who once laughed with her at rooftop bars erased her from their contact lists. Her name became something people avoided saying in polite circles. I didn't watch any of it unfold in person. I didn't need to. Because while they were losing everything, I was rebuilding. With Mr. Sterling's help, the trust fund was fully restored. I bought back my parents' property and poured myself into my work with a kind of devotion that surprised even me. My small landscaping studio grew quickly. Word spread. Clients came. City planners asked for proposals. Parks I once walked through as a tired laborer became projects I was now designing. Sometimes, I stood alone in my office after everyone left, staring at the walls covered in drawings and plant layouts, and wondered how close I had come to losing all of this without ever knowing it was mine. Trauma doesn't vanish just because justice arrives. Some mornings, I still woke up before dawn out of habit. My body remembered factory schedules even when my life no longer required them. Sometimes I caught myself calculating grocery prices down to the penny, even though I no longer had to choose between food and rent. Healing is not dramatic, it's repetitive. It's teaching your nervous system that safety exists again. It's reminding yourself, day after day, that you're no longer owned by someone else's lies. One afternoon, while I was reviewing irrigation plans for a botanical garden, I found myself staring out the window at a row of young trees we had just planted. Their branches were thin, fragile, barely able to hold their own weight, but their roots were already spreading underground. That's when it hit me. I had been like that tree for 10 years, bending in silence, surviving storms no one saw. And now, finally, I was growing. People still talk about what happened at that party. Some call it poetic justice. Some call it karma. Some call it revenge. But to me, it was simply the truth catching up. Paula and Derek didn't fall because I destroyed them. They fell because they built their lives on theft. I just stopped carrying their lies for them. I've replayed that night in my head more times than I can count the moment Paula tried to have me removed. The way her face froze when Mr. Sterling spoke my name. The sound of Derek's glass shattering on marble. Not because I enjoy remembering their downfall, but because it reminds me how easily dignity can be mistaken for weakness. For 10 years, they thought I was stupid because I worked with my hands. They thought I was powerless because I trusted them. They thought I was invisible because I wore work clothes instead of designer gowns. They were wrong. I learned something important through all of this. Never measure your worth by how others treat you. And never assume that silence means submission. Sometimes, silence is simply someone gathering strength. I also learned that greed is a double-edged sword. It cuts both ways. Paula and Derek traded integrity for luxury, compassion for control, and family for comfort. In the end, they lost their freedom, their reputations, and each other. And I gained something far more valuable than money. I gained myself. These days, when I walk through gardens I've designed, I pay attention to small things: how sunlight filters through leaves, how bees hover over flowers, how children run barefoot across grass that didn't exist a year ago. I used to think happiness was something loud and dramatic. Now I know it's quiet. It's safety. It's knowing no one can take your future from you again. If there's one message I hope my story leaves behind, it's this: don't let anyone convince you that you deserve less. Not because of your job. Not because of your clothes. Not because you're kind. And if someone ever tries to build their success on your suffering, remember truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how carefully it's buried. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever been judged, betrayed, or underestimated, I hope you know that your strength is real, even when it feels invisible. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Truth Vault for more stories about resilience, awakening, and reclaiming your life. Because sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming free.